The road to Whitefish and back. Our 2018 family reunion took place in Whitefish, Montana. On the first day of our outing, we drove through the Snowy Mountain Byway in Wyoming and stopped in Rawlins for the night. The second day took us through the northern edge of Yellowstone Park and into Bozeman, Montana. On the third day, we visited Helena, the capital of Montana, and also the semi-ghost town of Marysville, before continuing on to Whitefish and completing our journey. After 4 days of family fun in Montana, the 8th day of our trip saw us drive south to Salmon, Idaho. The morning of the 9th day was spent getting us into Grand Teton National Park, where we spent the afternoon before continuing on to Du Bois, Wyoming for the night. On the 10th day, we returned to Parker. We began our trip by taking I-25 north into Wyoming and up to I-80 where we turned west. We followed I-80 only as far as Laramie, then we got off onto State Road 130, the Snowy Mountain Byway, and followed that through the Medicine Bow Mountains. Then we returned to I-80 and on to Rawlins for the night. When we got on the byway, it was lunchtime, so we found a pretty stream and pulled off to have our lunch.
This might be a beaver dam here. Not really sure. Don't see any beavers.
No beavers, but there were flowers. Then it was on to see Brooklyn Lake, backed by the Snowy Mountain Range. And even in August, there was still some snow on the peaks of the Snowy Mountains. The area also had its own wildflowers. Close to Brooklyn Lake was St. Albans Chapel, seen here. Then we took Towner Lake Road, a very rough dirt road for several miles, past several small lakes. And this one is unnamed, but was totally deserted when we got there, as was, fortunately, the very poorly conditioned road that we drove. This rather striking-looking object along Towner Lake Road appeared to be carved, but on closer examination it proved to be just the remnants of a decaying tree. Further along Towner Lake Road, we encountered this very pretty field of daisies. This is the Libby Flats observation point at the summit of the Snowy Mountain Byway. And we're at 10,000 feet here, and you can see that the mountains are still towering somewhat above us and still have all that snow. Next on the byway was Mirror Lake, whose reflective properties were somewhat disturbed by the slight ripple on the water. Adjacent to Mirror Lake is Lake Marie, which we see here. We ended our drive through the snowy mountain byway by stopping at the French Creek Interpretive Center, where there is this stream which presumably has beavers in it. But once again, although we saw a beaver dam, or what looks like a beaver dam, we saw no beavers. Following this, we went on to Rawlins for the night. The motel in Rawlins provided us with an attractive site to have our dinner, which was pretty attractive in its own right. On our second day, we drove north and west through Wyoming, stopping at Meeteetse for lunch. Just north of Cody, we got onto Highway 296, a back door into the northeast corner of Yellowstone Park, and then we traversed the northern edge of Yellowstone Park. We continued north in Montana, stopping for the night in Bozeman. Shortly after turning west on State Road 296, we encountered this massive red rock formation, and as we look out beyond that, we see the beginning of the switchbacks which we would be following on Highway 296 as it took us into Yellowstone Park. Later on, from a summit, we were able to look down at the switchbacks ahead. Also at the summit were some chipmunks. Some 20 miles before entering Yellowstone Park, Beartooth Mountain dominated the scene. As we drove across the northern edge of Yellowstone Park, we saw many buffalo and one distant moose. On the third day of the trip, we drove north and west through Montana, stopping at Helena to see the capital, and then a few miles north of Helena, stopping at Marysville, a semi-ghost town. We then continued on to Whitefish. Here we have arrived at Helena, the capital, and this is the Capitol building. And Montana being a copper mining state, the dome is made of copper, but of course they don't invest in polishing it, so it looks black rather than coppery. Here we have the lobby of the Capitol building, and here is the dome, the copper dome from the inside. This is the Senate chamber, and above the Senate chamber on the upper wall are historic paintings. And then there's a stained glass ceiling. And this is the somewhat larger and somewhat more seedy looking House chamber. Also with some historic pictures on the wall. A little northwest of Helena is the semi-ghost town of Marysville, which was a bustling mining town around the turn of the 20th century, but with about 4,000 people, 2 newspapers, and 2 railroads. But today it has only 80 people left, and this destination restaurant. The Masonic building to the left of this scene was built in 1898. This theater, the Falling Rock Theater, was built in 1895, and we really know nothing about the building next door. Here we're looking up Grand Street, and we're seeing the Catholic Church built in 1886, and beyond that is the Methodist Episcopal Church, which was also built in 1886. From Marysville, we continued on to Whitefish, where we found our rental home, seen from the front and here from the back, and the whole clan gathered together for 4 days of fun. Over the next several days, we all settled in, some to work and some to play. One day, the entire group took a hike on the Whitefish trails to see the Sykes Lake overlook. And here we are at the Sykes Lake overlook, and from there, this is what we could see. Unfortunately, there were a number of large fires in the area, and the smoke and haze from those pretty much destroyed any long-distance viewing. The whole western side of Glacier National Park was closed, and we were unable to go there. The following day, we went to Whitefish City Beach at the southern end of Whitefish Lake. The beach and the lake are no doubt very pretty, but again the smoke and haze which fill the valley detracted quite a bit from that. However, it didn't keep Jack from having a good time throwing rocks in the lake. And Henry was not to be left out either, as he observed and emulated. While Grandma and Grandpa watched the kids, the middle generation rented boats and headed out for a paddle in the lake. After the paddlers returned, we went back to the rental house, being reminded on the way back that Whitefish is a major train center. In the evening, Bob treated us all to a 1965 vintage port, 53 years old. On the 16th of August, our last full day in Whitefish, the whole group took a ride down 50 miles to Flathead Lake and took a sightseeing boat. Although the haze and smoke filled the lake and prevented any really long-distance views, we did see some of the very fancy houses along the lake. In the evening, we staged the annual water fight.
Dad, this is not a spectator sport. Oh, look at that doggy. I don't think you probably wouldn't mind. Hey, Jackson, don't squirt the dog, okay?
I'm not. No. I never.
He's like, I want to play. He's going to be busy just filling up the single. You've been volunteering for this.
Hey, Jackson. Do you think Amy can catch the water balloon?
I will bet that
Let's find out.
It's not fair.
You never saw him coming.
Okay, Jack.
Put your gun down.
Okay, come closer. Come this way. Ready? Oh! Close! Oh! Chile! Hey, Jack!
I don't mind. I might try next week.
Nice!
I mean,
Yeah,
it's so warm,
you might want to turn around now.
Very fun when people get me right away.
Oh, nice catch.
Mom, stop! Oh, Henry!
Oh, yeah. We can't splash you while you're refilling.
Oh, no, oh, I'm refilling!
I said you guys One, two, Are you waiting to see which way I go like a soccer goalie?
You're the only person who's gonna play with him.
I live from the back end.
Genius!
You got another? Who's gonna get it?
Don't give it to Mom. Don't trust him.
I do.
Oh,
Son.
it's his mother.
Now she's just gonna throw it back at you.
But all good things must come to an end, so early the next morning we packed the car and dropped down south along the eastern shore of Flathead Lake before joining US 93 and taking that south to the Idaho border. In Idaho, we continued a short way south to the town of Salmon. The next day, we followed State Roads 28 and 33 into Wyoming. Entering Wyoming from the west, we spent the afternoon seeing Grand Teton National Park and then exited onto US 287 and continued southwest to Du Bois, where we spent the night. We have entered Grand Teton National Park at the town of Moose, and we are here at the Episcopal Church of the Transfiguration, a little chapel which overlooks the Grand Teton Mountains. This is the view from inside the chapel, looking over the altar. The Snake River is located just to the right of this picture, and for many years Menner's Ferry, seen here, was the only way to cross it. From the highway we got this view of the Grand Teton Mountains. As you can see, the smoke and haze was still with us, and it very much detracted from the views. We then took a hike along the east side of String Lake, with some of the Teton peaks seen to the west. This pan and the following two stills are taken from near the north end of String Lake. This and the next several clips are Jenny Lake, looking across from the Jenny Lake overlook. We've driven to the top of Signal Mountain, which stands 800 feet over the Jackson Hole Valley and gives you this panoramic view of the entire valley. However, with all the smoke and haze, that view does not really amount to much today, as you can see. The next day we followed US 287 back to I-80, retracing a bit of our day 2 route. Then we followed I-80 back to I-25, re-entered Colorado, and did retrace our entire first day route there back to Parker, bringing our trip to an end.